The wind clawed at the highway like it wanted to tear the little truck apart. Snow spat against the windshield in diagonal streaks, white ghosts chasing the glass. Clara Bennett's knuckles were pale on the steering wheel, the heat long gone from the vents. Her gas gauge hovered just above empty, the orange light blinking like a threat. Mom, Eli said softly from the passenger seat, his breath fogging the window. "Are we almost there?" She didn't answer right away. The GPS had stopped tracking miles ago, no signal this deep in the Montana backcountry. The road, if you could call it that, was more gravel than asphalt, now winding through pine and frozen air. The truck groaned around each curve. "Almost," she said finally, even though she wasn't sure. "Just hang in there, buddy." He nodded, hugging the sleeping bag tighter around his shoulders. His eyes, the same hazel green as hers, watched the falling snow with a strange calmness for a 12-year-old who'd just lost everything. The silence inside the cab felt heavier than the storm outside. Clara kept her focus on the dim headlights cutting through the fog, but her mind replayed the auction that morning like a cruel joke. The crowd, the whispering, the moment she'd lifted her hand and bid 50 cents on something no one else wanted, and the laughter that followed. 50 cents, half a dollar, half a life. It was all she had left in her pocket after the divorce, the foreclosure, the months of scrambling for jobs that never called back. So when the auctioneer's hammer fell and the clerk shoved the crumpled deed across the table, she'd told herself it was a sign. A 50-cent miracle. But miracles were never that easy. They reached the cabin just before dark, a sagging skeleton of timber at the end of a dirt road that looked like it hadn't seen another car in a decade. The roof bowed under the weight of old snow. The porch leaned, the steps half broken, and the window shutters swung like loose teeth. Eli peered through the windshield. "It's smaller than the pictures." Clara almost laughed, but it came out as a shaky sigh. "Pictures lie," she said. "Let's check it out." The door creaked like a warning when she pushed it open. The air inside smelled of mildew and dust, the ghost of something animal long since gone. A mouse scurried across the floorboards. Somewhere deeper in the cabin, something shifted, a groan, or maybe just the wood settling after years of cold silence. Eli's flashlight beam swept across the room, a stone fireplace split with cracks, a broken table and walls papered in peeling yellow. The floor was littered with pine needles and old newspapers. "Home sweet home," Clara whispered. Eli looked up at her. "You really think we can fix it?" She smiled the way mothers do when they're terrified. "I think we can fix anything." By the time they hauled their few boxes inside, the light had died. The cabin swallowed the last of the daylight whole. Clara fired up the camp stove on the table and poured a bit of water into a dented pot. Coffee. Her last real comfort. Outside, the forest breathed in long, slow gusts of wind. It was a different kind of silence here, not the hollow quiet of empty apartments or courtrooms, but something ancient, watching, waiting. She sipped the bitter coffee and stared at the firelight trembling against the walls. For the first time in months, the weight in her chest shifted. Not gone, but lighter. Like maybe she could breathe again. Eli was already unrolling his sleeping bag on the cleanest patch of floor he could find. "Mom," he said, his voice sleepy, "what if the roof leaks?" "It probably does," she said, pulling her coat tighter. "But we'll patch it in the morning." He yawned. "What if someone lived here before us?" Clara's eyes drifted toward the carved letters on the windowsill. She hadn't noticed them until now. Faint initials scraped into the wood, half faded by time. STR. She ran her fingers over them. Whoever had been here before had left their mark, a whisper in the grain. Someone did, she said quietly. But it's ours now. The wind picked up after midnight, rattling the windows. Clara couldn't sleep. The floor creaked with each gust as if the house was remembering footsteps. She pulled out her leather journal, the one Eli had given her for her birthday 2 years ago, and began to write under the dim glow of a lantern. January 6th. Arrived at the cabin. Roof unstable. Fireplace functional. Water source unknown. Found initials STR on sill. Tomorrow inspect structure, locate spring, start repairs. Her handwriting trembled from the cold. She drew a shaky breath and looked at the sleeping shape of her son curled up under the blanket. "We're gonna make it," she whispered. "We have to." The door groaned against the wind, but didn't open. Not yet. Morning came gray and brittle. Frost edged the windows. Clara started a fire and boiled water for instant oatmeal. The smell filled the cabin like a memory of comfort. "Can I explore outside?" Eli asked, pulling on his jacket. "Stay close. If you see anything, snakes, holes, whatever, you yell." "Okay." He nodded and slipped out into the pale light. The silence that followed made the cabin feel even emptier. Clara started cleaning again, sweeping dust into piles, pushing aside a collapsed chair. Beneath it, she found a stack of old receipts, all stamped with the same name, Samuel T. Reeves Mining Comb. She frowned. The name scratched into the windowsill suddenly meant something more. Reeves. She'd seen that name before on rusted signs along the old highway. Mining, silver, history. Outside, Eli's footsteps crunched through the snow. "Mom," he called. "Come see this." Her heart jumped. She set down the broom and rushed out. Eli stood at the edge of the porch, pointing toward a small ridge behind the cabin. The morning sun hit the slope just right, revealing a trail of flat stones stacked deliberately leading uphill. "Someone built that," he said. She squinted. "Maybe it's just an old marker." "Then why does it look like an arrow?" He was right. The stones weren't random. They pointed toward something. She forced a smile. "We'll check it out later. After we make this place livable. Promise, promise." But as they went back inside, Clara kept glancing at the ridge through the frosted window. The way those stones caught the light, it felt intentional, like the mountain itself was watching them. That night, as they sat by the crackling fire, Eli said, "Ma, do you think we were meant to find this place?" She hesitated. "Meant to, like maybe we're supposed to fix it, or finish it." She looked at the journal in her lap, the initials on the window, the ridge glowing faintly under the moonlight. "Maybe," she said softly. "Maybe we are." He smiled, satisfied, and settled into his sleeping bag. Within minutes, he was asleep. Clara stared into the flames, lost in thought. Who was Samuel T. Reeves? What did he leave behind here? And why did the woods feel so full of secrets? She closed her journal and whispered the thought aloud, a quiet vow to the empty room. You don't gamble with your last 50 cents unless you're out of options. The fire cracked, throwing sparks into the dark. The back room groaned again. Clara paused mid-step. She'd heard it twice now, once last night, and again just now, as she tried to clear out the ruined kitchenette. It wasn't just the wind. It was something deeper, something shifting. She set down the cracked coffee mug she was wiping clean and stepped toward the hallway. The cabin creaked with every breath of wind, but this was different. Focused, like something underfoot. The kind of sound that raised the hair on your arms, not loud, just wrong. She pushed open the warped door to the back room. The space was small and nearly bare except for an overturned dresser and a built-in shelf mounted to the far wall. The floor sloped slightly downward on the left side boards, dry and darkened by time. Dust coated everything. Eli stood in the middle of the room, flashlight beam jittering as he turned toward her. "I think this room used to be something else," he said. Clara raised an eyebrow. "What makes you say that?" He pointed to the shelf. "Look how deep it is. It goes way further back than it should. And look at the wall behind it. Doesn't it seem like it was added later?" She stepped closer, brushing dust off the edges. He was right. The shelf had an odd depth, nearly 2 feet, and the wall behind it didn't match the rest of the cabin's structure. The boards were newer, set into the older logs at uneven angles like a rushed patch job. Eli leaned in closer. "And these marks, see them?" He pointed to faint etchings near the baseboard. "They're not scratches. They're letters. Worn out, but still there." Clara squinted. "STR. The same initials from the windowsill." "That's twice now," she murmured. "Same initials, 2 rooms apart." Eli looked up at her, eyes gleaming. "You still think this place is empty?" Clara didn't answer right away. She took a breath, brushing her fingers over the carvings. "This place isn't haunted. It's just forgotten." They stood in silence for a moment, letting that idea settle. Then a sharp snap echoed beneath them, wood cracking a hollow echo that made Clara jump back instinctively. Eli dropped the flashlight, and it rolled toward the slope in the floor, coming to rest at the edge of a warped plank. Clara moved fast. She crouched and ran her fingers along the plank's edge. It wasn't nailed down properly. One corner wiggled with just a little pressure. She grabbed her multi-tool from her jacket pocket and slid the flathead underneath. The board popped up with a reluctant creak, revealing a narrow cavity underneath. She shined the flashlight down. Bundles. Wrapped in thick, oiled canvas, dark with age. Dozens of them. Some flat like folders, others square and rigid. There was barely a foot of space, but the void ran deep along the room's edge. Eli leaned in, eyes wide. "Whoa, is that like treasure?" "Let's not get ahead of ourselves," Clara said, though her heart was racing. She carefully lifted one of the bundles out. The canvas flaked under her fingers. Inside, she found a collection of thick, yellowed documents, topographic maps, charts, letters, and a small leather-bound notebook. The name on the corner of every document was stamped or handwritten. Samuel T. Reeves. Clara sat back on her heels. Samuel T. Reeves. He wasn't a ghost. He was real. And clearly, whoever he was, he'd used this cabin for more than just shelter. "What do we do with this stuff?" Eli asked, crouching beside her. "I don't know yet," she admitted. "We go through it carefully. We try to figure out who Samuel was. And we don't tell anyone outside this cabin, not yet." Eli nodded, suddenly solemn. "Secret stash rules. Got it." Clara smiled at his enthusiasm, though her thoughts spun faster with every page she skimmed. The maps were detailed mining surveys, geological readings, claims. Some pages were annotated in pen with strange symbols and coordinates. This wasn't junk. This was someone's life's work. She placed the bundle on the table in the main room and unwrapped another. This one held samples, small rock fragments sealed in jars, each labeled with codes and measurements. The dates ranged from 1961 to 1968. "This guy was running some kind of operation out here," she murmured. "Not just camping." They spent the rest of the afternoon organizing the find. Eli took charge of logging everything they found in her journal: coordinates, names, sample labels. Clara mapped out the locations from the documents, comparing them to the terrain she'd seen behind the cabin. Late afternoon light filtered through the window as Clara held the worn notebook in her hands, the one that had been bundled separately. Its leather was cracked, the edges water-damaged, but it opened easily. Inside were journal entries, some brief, some sprawling, written in clean cursive page after page. August 4th, 1963. Second core sample positive. Signs of silver veining present at lower elevations. Don't trust Thomas. He's pushing for signatures too fast. Says we can't afford another winter without movement. I say we can't afford selling out. Clara frowned. Thomas. Brother partner. She read another entry. October 12th, 1964. The cabin is secure. Hidden floor is complete. No one should find the materials unless they're looking hard. God willing, no one ever will. Too late for that, Clara muttered. She looked at Eli, who was sitting cross-legged beside a stack of ore samples. What would someone hide all this for? He asked. Clara hesitated. Maybe he didn't want anyone else to use it. Why she thought about that? About corporate greed, land grabs, and what she knew of Montana's mining history. Because maybe it was worth a lot. And maybe he didn't trust who it might fall into. Eli's eyes lit up. So it is treasure. Clara laughed quietly. Information can be more valuable than gold. They worked until dark, the fire crackling low and steady. As they cleaned up, Clara couldn't stop staring at the documents. Every inch of her said this wasn't random. It meant something. Something unfinished. That night, she couldn't sleep. The wind had died and the quiet was unnerving. She read more of the notebook by firelight. Samuel's entries grew darker with time references to betrayal, land pressure, legal disputes. Who was he protecting? She closed the book and stared at the flames. If this man had hidden his work, there was a reason. And if that reason was still out there, buried or forgotten, it might matter. It might even be something they could use, not just to survive, but to start again. In the stillness, she heard Eli shifting in his sleep. Tomorrow they'd go to town. Maybe the library. Maybe there were records. Maybe someone remembered who Samuel T. Reeves was. But for now, Clara picked up her pen and wrote 2 words in the journal. Find Samuel. From the back room, the cracked floor groaned again, and outside the stones on the ridge caught the moonlight like a signal. The floor gave way with a snap. Clara heard it from the main room, wood splintering, a sudden thud, then Eli's panicked voice tearing through the still morning air. Mom! The floor just caved in, and there's something underneath. She dropped the pile of documents she'd been sorting and rushed down the narrow hall. The back room was dim-lit only by weak sunlight filtering through the crooked window. Dust hung in the air like smoke. Eli stood wide-eyed near the corner flashlight, shaking in his hand. One of the old planks had broken beneath his foot and now dangled into darkness. Clara knelt beside him. Are you hurt? He shook his head quickly. No. I didn't fall through, just stepped on the edge, but... Look. She leaned over the edge of the broken plank. A shallow cavity lay beneath, deeper than the first one they'd discovered, but better hidden. The faint glint of metal caught her eye. Carefully, she reached down and pulled up a tarnished steel box the size of a shoebox. Heavy. Her hands trembled as she set it on the floor. The box was locked with an old-fashioned latch, rusted but intact. Eli crouched beside her, eyes gleaming with a mix of fear and thrill. You think it's more maps? Clara hesitated. I don't know. It wasn't just the box. As she looked deeper into the hole, she saw more layered boards supporting beams and what looked like a trap door. Only this one was buried under debris and layers of aged, packed dirt. Whoever had built this had gone to great lengths to keep it hidden. She turned back to the steel box. With a bit of pressure and a grunt, the latch popped open. Inside, neatly arranged and bound with a leather strap, was a stack of papers. At the bottom, wrapped in wax paper, was an envelope sealed with red wax. No name. Just an embossed emblem in the corner, an R inside a compass rose. She stared at it for a long moment. Reeves Eli guessed. Clara nodded slowly. I think so. She opened the top folder first. Inside were legal documents, drafts of mineral rights claims, letters addressed to the Bureau of Land Management. Even survey permits, none of them filed, all marked draft in Samuel's handwriting. Some were annotated. Too early. Don't trust Thomas, and they'll use it wrong. Clara leaned back on her heels. He never filed any of this. Eli frowned. Why would someone do all that work and just not follow through? She didn't have a good answer. Maybe he was waiting. Or maybe something happened before he could. They sat in silence for a moment, surrounded by the smell of dust and cold earth. Clara pulled the sealed envelope from the bottom of the box and turned it over in her hand. The wax crumbled as she peeled it open. Inside was a letter written in the same sharp, controlled handwriting as the journal entries. It wasn't addressed to anyone in particular. It read more like a confession. I built the floor to protect what I could. The claims, the samples, the truth. They wanted to turn this land inside out, strip it, sell it. I said no. They said they'd bury me, so I buried the work instead. If you're reading this, then the cabin survived. That means maybe, just maybe, you're someone who'll understand why I couldn't sign my name to their war on this mountain. Don't trust Thomas Reeves, not even if he's dead. The land remembers. So should we. Clara folded the letter slowly, her fingers cold. The man hadn't just been hiding data, he was hiding from something, from someone. She looked at the broken plank, the steel box, the sealed maps and papers. Eli, she said quietly, I think we just inherited a fight we don't even understand yet. He blinked at her. What do we do? She stood up. We find out who Samuel T. Reeves really was. That afternoon, Clara and Eli drove into town. Hamilton, the nearest place with internet cell signal and a library that looked like it hadn't changed since the 70s. The librarian was a thin woman, with gray hair tucked into a messy bun and dark-rimmed glasses. A name tag read, Claire Whitaker. Clara approached the desk, holding a folder with one of Samuel's old letters and the compass rose emblem. Excuse me, she said. I'm looking for information on someone named Samuel T. Reeves. He may have lived near Willow Creek Ridge in the 60s. Claire raised an eyebrow. Reeves, as in Reeves Mining. Clara's pulse jumped. I don't know, maybe. Does that name mean something here? Claire set down her tea and stood. Oh, it means a lot. Hold on. She disappeared into the archives section, returning minutes later with an old yearbook-thick binder. She opened it across the counter, flipping past headlines about silver booms, family disputes, land claims, and local protests. Samuel Thomas Reeves, youngest son of Marshall Reeves, who founded the company in 1931. Rumor was Samuel was brilliant, but hated the business. Dropped off the grid in the late 60s. Never seen again. Clara leaned in, scanning the faded photographs. One showed two men standing side by side in front of a drill rig. Both had the same sharp jaw, same serious eyes. "Which one is Samuel?" Claire tapped the one on the left. "That's Thomas, the older brother. Took over the company." That one, she tapped the right, that's Samuel. Disappeared right after a falling out with the board. Eli leaned in. "They look the same." Claire smiled. "That's what makes betrayal easier, doesn't it? When it comes from someone who looks just like you." Clara felt her throat tighten. "Is there any record of him ever filing claims on Willow Creek Ridge?" she asked. Claire flipped to another page, maps, land parcels, legal filings. "Nothing under his name," she said. "But that ridge, it's been dormant for decades. Consolidated Mining holds the perimeter now, but not the core. Not the core." Claire smiled slightly. If someone else filed it quietly and never recorded it in county books, it might still be open. Clara felt the air shift around her. Something in her chest sparked. "Can I make copies of all this?" "Sure thing," Claire said. "And if you want to dig deeper, I have access to the historical registry records at the state level." Eli beamed. "So Samuel might have had a secret claim?" "Not just a claim," Claire said, tapping the compass rose emblem. "A message. This symbol, it shows up in early mining families all over this region. It's like a signature. Not legal. Personal." Clara stared at it, thoughts racing. If Samuel had the research and never filed it, if he built that trap door to hide the work, then maybe, just maybe, he meant for someone else to pick it up. And now that someone was her. As they walked out of the library, snow was beginning to fall again, soft and steady. Clara looked down at the envelope in her hand. Samuel's words echoing in her head. "Don't trust Thomas Reeves." She glanced at Eli, who was staring up at the white sky, face full of wonder. "We're not done," she said. "This isn't just about fixing the cabin anymore." Eli turned toward her. "Then what's it about?" She looked past him toward the tree-covered ridges where the land still held secrets. "Legacy," she said, "and figuring out what he left behind." As they climbed into the truck, Eli pulled the letter from his jacket again. "Hey, Mom, yeah." He held up the wax seal. "This emblem, I think it's pointing somewhere. Not just a logo, like a compass." Clara blinked, studying it again. And for the first time she wondered, what if Samuel wasn't just hiding something? What if he left a trail? The road ahead wound toward Willow Creek Ridge, silent under snow. Behind them, the past was starting to wake up. The wind had settled overnight, but Clara's mind hadn't. She sat at the kitchen table, if you could still call it that, flipping through photocopies from the library. Names, maps, references to court filings. Eli was still asleep in the corner, his blanket curled tight around him. The fire had died to embers. A compass rose, an unfinished claim, a vanished man. She stared at the emblem again. Claire was right, it wasn't just decoration. The points of the compass were uneven, skewed slightly west. That felt intentional. She stood, grabbed her boots, and stepped outside. The morning was cold, sharp, and quiet. Across the clearing, the ridge loomed in the pale dawn like a crouched giant. Eli had been right, it was pointing somewhere. She followed the old trail behind the cabin, the one marked by the stacked stones he'd spotted days before. It wound up the ridge in gentle curves, slowly gaining elevation. The snow crunched beneath her boots, soft and untouched. Halfway up, she saw it another cairn. Not random. Deliberate. She moved faster now, finding more each stone marker, guiding her deeper into the forest up the slope. Then she saw it. At the crest of the ridge, nestled between two old-growth pines, was a clearing, and in its center, buried beneath brush and snow, a half-rotted wooden post. marked with an R, the same compass emblem carved beneath it. She crouched beside it, brushing the snow away with her gloved hand. Beneath the post, hammered into the soil, was a rusted steel tag. Coordinates. She pulled her phone out. No signal. But she snapped a picture anyway. Her breath clouded in the cold as she whispered, "You weren't hiding it. You were marking it." Back at the cabin, Eli was awake and chewing on a granola bar. "Where'd you go?" "Up the ridge," she said, pulling off her gloves. "I found something." His eyes lit up. "We need more help," she said. "Someone who knows this land. Someone who can help us verify what we're looking at." Eli nodded, already excited. "Claire," she shook her head. "Someone who's been here longer." An hour later, Clara was back in town. Claire Whitaker stood behind the counter again, sorting donated books. Her eyes brightened when she saw Clara. Back so soon, Clara placed the steel tag on the counter, along with a printed satellite photo she'd marked up by hand. "I found this post on the ridge. Same compass rose. The coordinates lead to a geological shelf. I think he was mapping his own sites." Claire leaned in, studying the image. He definitely was. And if you're right about this shelf, then it's likely one of the last undeveloped veins in the area. Clara hesitated, then asked, "Do you know anyone who worked with Samuel, someone who might still be around?" Claire straightened. "You're looking for Reuben Crow. He and Samuel were close. Grew up together. He lives out by Lone Horse Creek, off-grid mostly. But he comes into town once a month." "Where can I find him?" Claire tapped a note into her computer. "I can call his niece. If you're heading out that way, bring coffee. He doesn't talk to anyone who shows up empty-handed." The drive to Lone Horse Creek took nearly 2 hours. Dirt roads, dense woods, a frozen creek cutting through the landscape like a silver scar. They found the cabin tucked beneath the trees, smoke rising from a chimney, deer skulls hanging over the porch. Reuben Crow stood at the door before they could even knock, arms crossed over his chest. Weathered skin, sharp eyes, long gray braid trailing down his back. He didn't look surprised to see them. "I heard you've been poking around Samuel's old place," he said. Clara held up the thermos of hot coffee. He eyed it, then stepped aside. Inside the cabin was dark but warm. Worn rugs, shelves of hand-carved figures, and a cracked photograph of 2 young men leaning against a survey truck. One of them was definitely Samuel. She pointed at the photo. "That's him," Reuben nodded. "Samuel Thomas Reeves. Smartest man I ever knew. Most stubborn, too." She pulled the map from her bag and laid it out. "We found a series of markers. We think he was mapping a new vein. We also found survey permits all unfiled, and a sealed letter warning us not to trust his brother." Reuben poured himself a cup of coffee, sat down across from her. "He wasn't just digging for silver," he said. "He was digging for peace." Clara stilled. Back then, Reuben continued, there was pressure. His family wanted to expand operations. More land, more drilling. Samuel didn't want it. Said the mountain had given enough. He believed in sustainable extraction, just enough, never more. His brother Thomas. He saw dollar signs. "Is that why Samuel disappeared?" "Part of it," Reuben said. "He refused to sign the expansion contracts. Then suddenly land started changing hands. Samuel went quiet. Next thing I know, he's building a false floor in that cabin and disappearing for good." Eli leaned forward. "Why hide it all instead of exposing them?" Reuben looked at him evenly. "Because when you're one man standing between your brother and millions of dollars, the truth doesn't get very far. Especially not back then." Clara's chest tightened. Do you think any of his research is still legally valid? If he never filed it, it's technically unclaimed. But that doesn't mean people won't fight you for it. She nodded slowly. Would you help us? We don't want to mine it. Not aggressively. We just want to prove it's real. Reuben studied her for a long moment, then stood. He opened a drawer and pulled out a copy of a hand-drawn map, similar to the one she had, but more detailed. Samuel gave this to me the week before he vanished, he said. Told me to hold on to it. I figured he'd come back. He never did. He handed it over. Use it wisely, he said. Some men leave footprints. Others leave unfinished stories. Back at the cabin, Clara spread the maps across the table. Her map, Samuel's, Reuben's. They aligned perfectly. The shelf on Willow Creek Ridge was real. The samples Samuel had tested showed high-grade silver content. But it wasn't just about the minerals. It was the way he'd marked safe zones, no-drill zones, and water protection routes. He wasn't just preserving data, he was preserving a philosophy. Eli looked at her. What now? We take this to someone who understands the legal side, she said. We don't tell anyone else yet. Just someone who can verify it. Another secret keeper, exactly. Eli grinned. You're getting good at this. Clara smiled faintly, but inside she felt the pressure building. They were stepping into something big, something old, something buried not just in earth, but in time and silence. She looked out the window toward the ridge. The snow was falling again, light but steady. Somewhere in that white silence, Samuel's voice still echoed, and it was leading them toward the next door, one that might open everything, and or bring it all crashing down. Snow fell hard that morning, blanketing the ridge in thick silence. Clara sat inside the cabin with a map spread across the table, tracing the red circles Samuel had drawn decades ago. They aligned with mineral-rich veins and ecological buffer zones, notes that weren't just scientific, but ethical. It wasn't a treasure map. It was a blueprint for how not to destroy a mountain. Eli sat nearby, quietly working on his notes. Reuben's map had given them more than coordinates. It had given them clarity. Samuel hadn't vanished in fear. He'd vanished to protect something. But if they wanted to claim anything legally, they'd need help. Not just someone who knew the land. Someone who could handle paperwork statutes, the kind of bureaucratic dead ends that had buried people like Samuel in the first place. Clara picked up the envelope Claire had given her at the library. Inside was the name of an environmental law specialist who'd been part of a preservation case against Reeves Mining back in the late 80s. A man with a reputation for standing up to corporate giants and an obsessive memory for land use law. Daniel Ferris, based out of Missoula, former EPA consultant, now semi-retired, working cases he actually believes in. She checked her phone. A single bar of reception blinked in and out like a heartbeat. She hit call anyway. Voicemail. She left a message. My name's Clara Bennett. I think I've uncovered something buried by the Reeves family, something Samuel Reeves tried to protect. I need legal advice and I need someone who won't sell me out. I have maps, records, and proof. Call me back. She ended the message and looked at Eli, who was watching her. You think he'll answer? If he's the man people say he is, she said he won't be able to help himself. He called back that night. His voice was calm, clipped, but curious. You said Samuel Reeves, he said. I haven't heard that name in 30 years. We found documents, surveys, maps, unfiled claims, hidden under the floorboards of a cabin he owned. Pause. You're on Willow Creek Ridge, yes. Another pause. I'll be there tomorrow by noon. And just like that, the past started walking toward them. Daniel Ferris arrived in an old white Jeep parked with precision just outside the cabin. He wore a thick wool coat, horn-rimmed glasses, and carried a leather messenger bag that looked older than Eli. He shook Clara's hand without smiling. "You either found something real," he said, "or you're pulling the most elaborate prank I've seen in decades." Inside, Clara laid out everything: maps or samples, letters, Samuel's journal, Reuben's editions. Ferris didn't interrupt once. He read in silence, flipping pages with slow, steady fingers. After an hour, he looked up. "Where's the sealed letter you mentioned in your voicemail?" Clara handed it to him. He read it twice, then leaned back in the creaking chair. "Samuel wasn't paranoid," he said. "He was strategic. He knew the legal system could bury a claim just as fast as a corporation could mine one." "Can this be validated?" Clara asked. "Yes," he said. "But that's not the hard part." She waited. "The hard part," Ferris continued, "is what happens after you validate it. If this mineral shelf is as intact as the data suggests, you're looking at potential valuations in the millions, possibly more depending on the yield. That kind of opportunity doesn't stay quiet for long." Eli frowned. "But we're not trying to sell it. We want to protect it." Ferris nodded. "That's what Samuel wanted too. Look how well that turned out." Clara's voice sharpened. "So what are our options?" Ferris pulled a legal pad from his bag. "First, we need to verify that the land isn't fully claimed. If the central shelf is still technically open, and I believe it is, we can register a preservation claim. Not for extraction, for conservation." "Would that hold up?" Clara asked. "With the right documentation, yes. But that's where it gets delicate. You're going to need to file before the information leaks. If Reeves Mining catches wind of what you're doing, they'll try to beat you to it or discredit your claim." Clara nodded. "We'll move fast." Ferris leaned forward. "You're going to be up against people who don't care that you're a single mom or that Samuel was trying to do the right thing. To them, you're just a roadblock. You sure you want to step into this?" She didn't hesitate. He buried the truth to protect it. "I'm not about to let it stay buried." Ferris smiled for the first time, just a flicker. "Well then," he said, "let's make some noise." That night, Clara stared at the maps again. "This isn't just about silver," she said aloud. "It's about control, about legacy." Eli looked up. "Do you think his brother knew Thomas?" she said. "Absolutely. I think that's why Samuel went underground. I think that's why the company never tried to build directly on the ridge, because they knew they were sitting on stolen ground." Eli frowned. "So why didn't they just wipe it out?" "Because even corporations have to follow some laws," Ferris said from the table behind her. "And if Samuel threatened to expose them, they might have kept it quiet to avoid a scandal." Clara turned. "So they just waited." "Exactly. They waited for the paperwork to vanish, for people to forget." She looked down at the compass, rose, traced her finger along the carved points. "But land remembers, and so do we." Ferris met her gaze. "Then you'd better remember this: if you want to beat them, you'll need more than old maps and good intentions. You'll need evidence, strategy, and someone who knows how to shout louder than they do." Clara stood slowly, spine straight. "Then we make it loud enough that they can't ignore us." The next morning, Ferris drove them to the county courthouse in Hamilton to start the filing process. While he handled the legal side, Clara took Eli to a diner down the street. It was quiet, the kind of place where everyone noticed new faces. A waitress with a sharp smile and a Reeves Mining pin on her collar poured their coffee. "You're not from around here," she said lightly. "No," Clara replied. "Just visiting." The woman nodded, eyes narrowing slightly. You the one staying up near the old ridge, that cabin's cursed, you know. Clara smiled. I don't believe in curses. The waitress leaned in. You should. People go digging up ghosts sometimes, the ghosts dig back. She walked away before Clara could answer. Eli whispered, That was creepy. Clara sipped her coffee. That was a warning. Back at the courthouse, Ferris met them outside. It started, he said, handing her a stamped copy of the preservation claim. We're in the system now. The clock's ticking. Clara looked at the paper. Proof. Beginning. She took a breath. Then let's give them something to chase. The first threat didn't come in a letter or a lawyer's notice. It came in the form of an unfamiliar truck parked halfway down the road to the cabin, matte black windows, tinted engine idling, even though no one sat behind the wheel. Clara slowed her truck as she approached Hart, picking up speed. Eli sat beside her, clutching the folder of maps tighter than usual. He noticed it too. That truck wasn't there when we left this morning, he said quietly. No, Clara muttered, checking the rearview mirror. It wasn't. She didn't stop. She drove slowly past her eyes, scanning the tree line. Whoever it was had seen them. That much was clear. But no one stepped out. No confrontation. Just presence. A message. She pulled up beside the cabin and parked, eyes still on the rearview mirror. The black truck didn't move. Eli stared at it. Do we call Ferris? Not yet, Clara said. Let's see what happens. But nothing did. Not that night. Not the next day. The truck was gone by morning, leaving only tire tracks in the snow and something colder than silence in its wake. Clara didn't sleep much after that, because now she knew. They knew. Daniel Ferris returned 2 days later, holding a manila folder thick with copies and notarized filings. Your claim's in the system, he said. They'll challenge it. Count on it. But it's official now. He paused, seeing Clara's face. What happened? We had a visitor, she said. Black pickup. No plates. Parked half a mile down the ridge, just long enough to make a point. Ferris's jaw tightened. Then they've been watching longer than we thought. Clara sat down, rubbing the bridge of her nose. I thought they'd come at us with legal letters, press releases. They will, Ferris interrupted. But intimidation always comes first. They want you nervous, disoriented. That's their playbook. Did it work? Eli asked. Clara didn't answer immediately. Then she looked at her son and said, It rattled me. But it didn't change a thing. Ferris smiled faintly. Good. Because it's only going to get messier from here. Later that day, Clara and Eli hiked the ridge again, this time marking coordinates with precision. Clara had started pinning reflective tacks into the trees, Samuel's system refined. A breadcrumb trail that wouldn't show up on maps, but would guide them in the dark if needed. I think he knew it would come to this, Clara said, as they stood near the oldest post Samuel had planted. Eli pulled the notebook from his backpack. He literally said it, They'll come for the truth even buried. Clara knelt to examine the marker. Under the snow, she found something new, a flat stone not part of the natural ridge. She lifted it. A second steel tag. No coordinates. Just an etching. A date. March 19th, 1971. She frowned. This wasn't a claim marker. Then what is it? Eli asked. She didn't answer. Not yet. But she took the tag and slid it into her pocket. Later that night, Ferris examined it by lamplight. March 1971, he said. The month Samuel officially disappeared from the records. Local rumor was he skipped town or died in the woods. No body was ever found. Clara watched him. You think it's a grave? Ferris didn't respond right away. Then I think it's something buried he didn't want disturbed. Like what? Like proof. 2 days later, the letter came. Certified mail, no return address. Clara opened it on the porch. Inside was a single sheet of thick paper. To whom it may concern, the land on which you've recently attempted to establish a preservation claim falls within the mineral acquisition perimeter established under the jurisdiction of Reeves Consolidated Holdings as of March 3, 1985. Any claim without acknowledgement or partnership with RCH will be considered invalid and subject to federal contest. We advise you to cease activity and contact our legal team. Respectfully, Leland Croft, Chief Legal Officer, Reeves Consolidated Holdings. Clara read it twice, then passed it to Ferris. He scanned it and chuckled under his breath. Croft. That snake's still slithering around. I tangled with him back in '92. He's bluffing. Eli looked up from the couch. You sure? Ferris nodded. There's no such thing as a mineral acquisition perimeter. It's made-up language to scare you off. They can't claim land they never filed for, and especially not land marked as preservation. But make no mistake, they're laying groundwork for a bigger strike. Clara folded the letter slowly. So what do we do? Ferris's eyes glinted. We respond. On the record. We push back loud public undeniable. And we file a discovery injunction. A what? Eli asked. It freezes any competing claims until the authenticity of yours is reviewed. It'll buy us time. Time for what? Ferris's voice turned grim. To find whatever Samuel buried on March 19, 1971. That night, Clara sat by the fire rereading Samuel's journal entries. Something had shifted in the pages around that date. His tone had turned desperate. They've turned my brother. He says it's business. I say it's betrayal. I'm not leaving this land to them. If they want it, they'll have to dig through truth to get it. She closed the book. Then she remembered the envelope, the one with the compass rose wax-sealed, that they'd found with the initial documents. She pulled it from the drawer and examined it again. Behind the wax was a faint engraving. It hadn't been visible before. But now she saw it. A faint, almost invisible number, 19.0371. The same date, embedded in more than one place. Clara stood, heart thudding. He hadn't just written it down. He'd encrypted it. This wasn't a warning. It was a location. Eli, she called, voice sharp. Grab your boots. We're going back up. He didn't even ask why. The night hike was cold but clear. They moved by flashlight and reflective tacks, following Samuel's path in reverse, this time guided by the clue itself. Clara stopped near the last marker and began scanning the snow. Start looking for anything unnatural, she said. Flat stones, disturbed roots, anything that doesn't belong. Eli moved off to the left. Then, over here, she ran to him. He was crouched by a jagged boulder half covered in snow. Beside it, another flat stone. Same size, same material, different symbol. This time, not a compass. This time, an R carved with a circle through it crossed out. Clara's breath caught. A rejection. A betrayal. She dropped to her knees and started clearing the snow. Beneath the stone was another steel box, larger, heavier, caked in mud. They lifted it out together. She opened it. Inside, tightly sealed in plastic wrap and wax paper, were dozens of black and white photographs. Maps, letters, signed affidavits, proof. Not just of the mineral discovery, but of the corporate cover-up. Handwritten testimonies from Samuel, diagrams of forged filings, timelines of when Thomas had pushed illegal purchases through proxies, even a sealed, notarized document naming Clara's own plot as part of the original conservation reserve long before Reeves Mining even acknowledged the land. It wasn't just a box of history. It was a legal bomb. Clara sat back, breathless. Eli looked at her. Is it enough? She stared at the evidence in her hands. Then she said the words that would carry them into the next storm. It's more than enough. It's war. The wind came howling down the ridge the next morning, screaming like it carried ghosts in its lungs. Clara stood in front of the cabin, the box of evidence from Samuel's secret cache cradled in her arms. Inside was enough to shake a corporation, enough to rewrite the legacy of a dead man, enough to put a target on her back. Daniel Ferris arrived before noon, face tight with urgency. He barely waited for coffee before diving into the contents of the box, carefully unfolding documents, squinting at faded photographs, and muttering dates under his breath. These aren't just notes, he said, lifting a stack of pages bound in a yellowing folder. These are affidavits, witnesses. Samuel didn't just record what his brother did, he got other people to sign off on it. Surveyors, junior geologists, a notary. He held up a page pointing to a faded stamp. That seal right there. That's government issued. If it's legit, this document alone could nullify Reeves Mining's claims on the entire southern shelf. Clara's pulse jumped. How do we prove it's legit? Chain of custody, Ferris replied. And media pressure. The second we go public, they'll scramble to dismiss it. But if we leak it before they're ready, we control the narrative. Eli leaned forward. So what do we do? Ferris looked at Clara. You hold the match. You decide when we light it. She exhaled slowly, heart pounding in her ears. We burn it down, she said. All of it. Ferris gave a slow nod. Then let's set the stage. By evening, Ferris had driven back to Missoula, taking scanned copies of everything with him. He promised to contact a trusted journalist he'd worked with before, someone who didn't flinch at lawsuits or smear campaigns. Clara and Eli stayed behind, barricaded in the cabin, as the wind picked up again. Snow slapped the windows sideways. The mountain groaned. Eli sat at the table, scribbling diagrams in his notebook. Clara stared into the fire. You think Samuel ever thought this would work? Eli asked. She glanced at him. I think he hoped someone would finish what he started. He tapped the journal. I don't get it. He had everything. Why not go public himself? She leaned back, voice low. Because he was alone. And being right doesn't always keep you safe. Eli was quiet for a long time. Then he said, We're not alone. She looked at him. He nodded toward the fire. Not anymore. The next day brought two things: confirmation from Ferris that the journalist Rachel Mendez was on board and ready to publish, and the fire. Not in the cabin, not in the forest, but in Reuben Crow's toolshed. It happened sometime before dawn. By the time Clara and Eli arrived, there was nothing left but smoke-charred beams and a smell that stung the eyes. Reuben stood in the snow, arms crossed, silent. His face was unreadable. Was anyone hurt? Clara asked. He shook his head. Just my tools. She stepped closer. You think it was Reeves Mining? He didn't answer right away. Then, they don't send messages unless someone's listening. Clara clenched her jaw. We're listening, and we're answering. Reuben looked at her. Then don't do it quietly. Back at the cabin, Clara packed everything into a weatherproof duffel, copies of the maps, photos, the notarized documents. She kept one drive for Ferris and another hidden inside the cabin, buried under the floorboards, where Samuel once hid the truth. That night, she got the call. Rachel Mendez's voice was sharp and fast, like she hadn't slept in days. I've reviewed Ferris's files. What you have is a time bomb. If even a third of it holds up, it's enough to launch an investigation and freeze Reeves's operations. Clara gripped the phone. So what's the play? We run the story. Full spread digital and print. Accompanied by a signed op-ed from you, something personal. If they want to smear you, they have to do it while the entire country's looking. Clara's throat tightened. And if they retaliate? They will, Rachel said bluntly. You don't call out a billion-dollar company and expect flowers. But if you keep the spotlight on them, they won't burn anything without being seen. Clara paused. Then publish it. Rachel exhaled. It'll go live Friday morning. As Clara hung up, her hand was shaking not from fear, but from weight. The kind of weight that meant no going back. Eli was waiting by the fireplace. Was that her? Clara nodded. It's happening, it's happening. The next morning, Clara opened the front door and stopped cold. A dead fox. Laid neatly on the steps. No blood. No visible wounds. But its eyes had been removed. She didn't scream. She just stared. Eli stepped beside her. What is that? Clara knelt down slowly. There was something beneath the fox slipped under its body. A folded piece of paper. She picked it up, no words. Just a crude drawing. A compass rose burning. She stood, lips pressed into a hard line. They're not just sending threats now, she said. They're daring us to flinch. Eli looked at the drawing, eyes wide. You okay? Clara met his gaze. No, she said. I'm angry. That night she stayed up late writing the op-ed Rachel requested. She didn't write like a lawyer. She wrote like a mother. Like a daughter of land that had been poisoned by greed. She wrote about Samuel. About the truth buried under frozen earth. About the fear that comes with standing up. And why it's worth it anyway. At the end, she wrote the line that would appear beneath her name in bold print. You don't get to rewrite history just because you buried it. By Thursday night, Ferris called again. They're going to file a temporary injunction against your claim. Can they do that? They can try. But it won't hold if we go public first. So we hold the line. Ferris chuckled. We don't just hold it. We make sure they choke on it. Friday morning, the article dropped. Front page of the Northwest Ledger. Within hours, it was trending online, buried legacy, one woman, one cabin, and the secret that could topple Reeves Mining. Photos of the cabin. Images of Samuel's journal. A scan of the burning compass rose they'd been sent labeled, threat delivered to source. By noon, reporters were calling. By 3 p.m., Clara's phone wouldn't stop vibrating. Eli sat by the window watching the snow fall like ash. Do you think they'll back off? Clara shook her head. They're not done. And she was right. Because just after dusk, a second truck rolled up the road. This one didn't stop a mile away. It parked right outside. And this time, someone got out. The man who stepped out of the truck wasn't who Clara expected. Not a corporate lawyer, not a muscle-bound threat, not even someone trying to hide behind a smirk. He was older, late 50s, maybe dressed in a heavy parka and snow-caked boots, his face lined and weather-beaten. His hair was silver, his eyes a deep, unsettled blue. And Clara knew those eyes before he even spoke. Name's Thomas Reeves, he said, voice steady. We need to talk. Clara stood frozen in the doorway, every instinct screaming to slam the door in his face. Eli rose behind her wide-eyed. "You shouldn't be here," Clara said. "I know," Thomas replied. "But I'm not here as Reeves Mining. I'm here as Samuel's brother." Clara stared at him, then stepped onto the porch and shut the door behind her, keeping Eli inside. "If this is a stunt," she said, voice low, "you're already too late. The story's out. The public's watching." Thomas sighed, the sound of someone tired of masks. "I'm not here to silence you. I know what's coming. I've known for years." She crossed her arms. "Then why show up now? Because I saw your name on the claim." "Bennett." He looked her square in the eye. "And I knew deep down I owed Samuel more than silence. And I owe you the truth." Clara narrowed her eyes. "You don't get to just walk up and clear your conscience." "No," he agreed. "But I can show you where the rest of the truth is." She blinked. "There's more." He nodded slowly. "Samuel didn't just leave behind maps and letters. He recorded everything. Audio tapes, dozens of them, journals. But he kept the most damning stuff hidden, not from me, but from the company. From the people watching." Clara's voice turned sharp. "And you just held on to them while Reeves Mining destroyed the mountain." Thomas flinched just slightly. "No, I buried them, just like he asked." She didn't speak for a long moment. "Finally, why now?" "Because I saw that dead fox on your porch in the papers. And because I know what Croft's capable of. And maybe I'm tired of being the villain in my brother's story." Clara studied him, trying to read the lines of a man who had once chosen silence over loyalty. He looked older than he should have, like regret had weight. "If you're lying," she said, "I'll make sure every paper in the country knows it." Thomas nodded. "Fair enough." She hesitated, then opened the door. Inside, Eli stood tense. When Clara motioned, he stayed seated, eyes locked on Thomas. Thomas looked around the cabin, eyes softening. "I haven't been here since 1972. Clara motioned to the table. "Where are the tapes? They're hidden in a deposit box under a different name," Thomas said, taking a seat. "If you want them, you'll need to go with me. I can't access them alone anymore. It's a two-signature lock." Clara's stomach twisted. "Why would Samuel do that? 'Cause he didn't trust me," Thomas said without hesitation. "Not entirely, but he also knew someday someone might force me to make the right choice. And now you think that's you?" He didn't answer right away. Then he said, "No, I think that's you. I'm just the key you need to open the door." By the next morning, Clara, Eli, and Thomas were on the road to Bozeman. The deposit box was in a private bank, small, discreet, unlisted, the kind of place that didn't ask questions. Thomas explained that after Samuel had vanished, he'd received a single package in the mail, a key, a set of coordinates, and a note with just 4 words, "If they come, bury." He did exactly that. Now, 30 years later, he was ready to unearth it. Inside the vault, the manager required dual verification. Thomas signed first, then Clara. The heavy metal door creaked open to reveal a single fireproof lockbox. Inside were 3 cassette tapes, a thick leather journal, and a sealed envelope with Clara's name on it. Handwritten. By Samuel. She stared at it. "He knew I'd come, no," Thomas said softly. He hoped someone would. Back at the cabin, Clara listened to the first tape. Samuel's voice crackled to life, faint but clear. He spoke slowly, methodically. "If you're hearing this, then I've failed to protect the ridge myself. That doesn't mean it's lost. It means it's waiting for someone with more courage than me. I recorded this as a record of what I've seen, what I've done. and what my brother hasn't. Clara glanced at Thomas, who sat silently by the fire staring into the flames. On the tape, Samuel continued. They forged filings, bought off the land registrar, even tried to push a false environmental study to hide toxic runoff. I said no so many times I started hearing it in my sleep. There was a pause. I don't hate Thomas. Not fully. I think he believes what he's doing is survival. But survival that crushes others isn't living. It's just extending your guilt. Clara felt the words in her chest like a pulse. She looked up to find Thomas already watching her, the weight of 30 years behind his eyes. Eli sat forward. What's in the journal? Clara opened it. Inside were field sketches, coordinates, full geological assessments, and a final section labeled Legacy. It detailed Samuel's wish not just to preserve the land, but to turn it into a cooperative land governed by locals restored through education, research, and sustainable stewardship. He had plans for a land trust, for scholarships, even a retreat center for kids from mining towns to show them another way. Clara whispered he didn't want to stop the world. He wanted to rebuild it. Thomas swallowed hard. He always thought better than me. No, Clara said, he just thought longer. That night, Ferris called again. I read the article. The affidavit signatures are being cross-checked. So far, 3 of the original witnesses have been located. 2 have agreed to speak on the record. We're building momentum. Clara told him about the tapes. Ferris was quiet for a beat. Then, if they hold up in court, it's game over. Reeves Mining will collapse under its own lies. But they won't go quietly, she said. No, which means you need to be careful, especially now. She nodded, even though he couldn't see her. What's the next step? We file a federal injunction. We bring the Department of the Interior in, and we get ready because Croft won't wait for the courts. Clara ended the call and looked across the cabin. Thomas had stood and now hovered by the door, staring into the night. She approached quietly. Why did you come back? He answered without turning. Because guilt is a loud companion, and silence only makes it scream. Later, when the house was quiet and the fire burned low, Clara opened Samuel's envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper. 1 sentence. The mountain never needed saving. It needed someone who could remember it was alive. She folded the letter slowly. Then she whispered to herself, voice steady and full, "You don't inherit land. You answer to it." The morning after the tapes aired, it felt like the world tilted on its axis. The Northwest Ledger had done more than publish the evidence. They'd uploaded excerpts of Samuel's recordings. His voice, clear and resolute, played on national news channels and flooded social media. Phrases like forged environmental study, corporate collusion, and silence bought by intimidation became trending hashtags. Clara watched from the cabin window as the first news crew trudged through the snow below, camera in hand, bundled in North Face jackets. Others would come, press investigators, maybe even protesters. The mountain wasn't just alive now. It was awake. Eli sat on the couch, scrolling through reactions online. People believe him, Mom. They're calling Samuel a whistleblower hero. Some are saying this could bring down half the board at Reeves Mining. Clara turned to Thomas, who sat quietly in the armchair, holding a cup of black coffee like it was the only thing anchoring him. "You're still not speaking to the press?" she asked. He shook his head. "I was the man in the shadows. I'm not the one they need to hear from." "You were part of it," she said carefully. "They'll find out sooner or later." "I know." He looked down at the cup. "But let me carry the guilt, not the spotlight." Clara didn't press. Not now. Because something more immediate was coming. Something that no amount of publicity could stop. And it arrived just after noon. A cease and desist order delivered in person by a man in a corporate parka and leather gloves. He didn't step past the porch, didn't even introduce himself, just held out a clipboard. Clara flipped through the document. Legal language threats of criminal trespass and the unmistakable weight of corporate arrogance. Reeves Consolidated Holdings was officially contesting her claim. She smiled without warmth. Tell your bosses it's already too late. The man didn't blink. Tell your lawyer to read page 9. We're invoking eminent domain under Mineral Emergency Statute 45-2-117. They're coming for the land. Her stomach dropped. That's not legal, she said. It doesn't have to be, he replied, turning to leave. It just has to stall you long enough. Ferris was already yelling by the time she reached him on the phone. Croft's going scorched earth. Eminent domain, that's desperation. He's trying to reroute it through state loopholes, claiming the mineral rights are tied to a public utility reserve. Clara paced the front room. Can they do that? In theory, no. In practice, if they pay off the right officials and move fast, yes. This is the legal equivalent of kicking in your door and daring you to stop them. Her voice hardened. So how do we stop them? We push for federal intervention, and we expose the pipeline. Clara froze. What pipeline? Ferris lowered his voice. The one Reeves has been building for years, quietly rerouting drainage and mineral waste through unregistered lines. It violates at least 3 EPA regulations. Samuel hinted at it in his journals. Can we prove it? If we can get photo samples, anything physical before they sanitize the area. Clara exhaled. Then we go find it. That night, Clara, Eli, and Reuben hiked out past the ridge under cover of dark, bundled in layers flashlights covered with red filters. They followed an old forestry trail, now barely visible under snow and overgrowth, toward the eastern shelf, where Samuel's notes hinted at unnatural runoff and ground temps inconsistent with elevation. It took them over an hour. And then they found it. Half buried under brush and ice, a row of unmarked pipes ran along the base of the slope, rusted, humming faintly, and still warm to the touch. Clara crouched beside one, brushing back snow. She caught a whiff of something sharp and metallic. Eli, she said, take a water sample. Careful. He filled the vial as Reuben took thermal photos with an old field camera. Clara snapped images from every angle. Pipes' discoloration in the snow, nearby animal tracks that abruptly stopped at the runoff site. This isn't just illegal, Reuben said, voice low. It's poison. Back at the cabin, Ferris was waiting. When they showed him the evidence, he sat back in stunned silence. I can work with this, he finally said. I'll send it to Rachel, and I'll file an emergency injunction. If we tie this to the tapes and the journal entries, it's checkmate. But Clara wasn't smiling, because something else had changed in her gut. This wasn't just about justice now, it was about danger. And in the silence that followed, a new truth settled over them all. The more truth you expose, the darker the eyes watching you become. The next day, things escalated fast. The injunction was filed at 10 a.m. News outlets picked up the pipeline story by noon. The EPA issued a statement by 4. And by dusk, the helicopters came. Not media. Government. 2 Blackhawks circled the ridge, surveying the damage, the pipes, the ridge that Clara once bought for 50 cents, now crawling with the weight of federal interest. Clara stood on the porch, watching the sky tremble with noise and rotor wash. Eli came up beside her. "Is this good? It's loud," she said. "That's all that matters right now." A car rolled up the drive, an unfamiliar sedan with government plates. Out stepped a woman in a dark coat, mid-40s, no nonsense. "Clara Bennett?" she asked. "Yes. Special Agent Lee Waters, Department of the Interior. I've been assigned to oversee this investigation. I need to speak to you and your legal counsel immediately." Clara stepped aside, motioned her in. Inside, Ferris was already on a call, barking legal citations. Agent Waters took a seat at the table, pulled out a notepad. "You're in danger," she said bluntly. Clara didn't flinch. "We know." Waters nodded. "We've intercepted chatter that suggests Reeves Mining may attempt to seize or destroy remaining evidence, possibly tonight. We're stationing 2 agents nearby, but I need you to relocate temporarily." "No," Clara said flatly. "I'm not running." Waters raised an eyebrow. "You misunderstand. This isn't a request. This is protocol." Ferris, overhearing, lowered his phone. "She's staying." Waters looked between them. "Then you'd better be ready." Clara's voice was steel. "Let them come. I'll meet them on the front porch with truth in both hands." That night, Clara didn't sleep. Neither did Thomas. He sat by the fire, staring into it like it could offer forgiveness. "You still think it's worth it?" he asked quietly. She didn't even hesitate. "Yes." He looked away. Even if someone gets hurt, Clara stared out the window, hand resting on Samuel's journal. Someone already did. A shadow moved outside. Just a fox this time. But Clara watched it long after it disappeared. Because she knew. The storm wasn't over. It was just crossing the tree line. The first sound was glass shattering. Then came the sharp crack of wood splintering, followed by Eli's voice, raw, panicked, shouting Clara's name from the back of the cabin. She didn't think. She moved. By the time Clara reached the living room, Thomas was already standing with the old hunting rifle Samuel had left behind, his hands trembling but firm. Eli crouched beside the table, shielding the duffel bag full of evidence. The front door was wide open, swinging in the wind. A single brick lay on the floor, shards of glass glittering around it like ice. Attached was a note taped, hastily smudged with dirt, and what Clara hoped wasn't blood. "Stop, or we'll bury you with the rest." Outside, headlights flared and vanished, gone before she could even reach the porch. The tire tracks were deep fresh and pointed downhill. "Everyone okay?" Clara asked, still scanning the tree line. Thomas nodded grimly. "They didn't come in. Just enough to scare." Eli held up the brick. It worked. Clara took it from his hand and stared at it. "No," she said. "It didn't." She turned to Thomas. "Time to finish what your brother started." By sunrise, Ferris was on site with 2 federal marshals, both armed and visibly unimpressed by mountain threats. They inspected the door, the brick, the note, and then fanned out into the woods with handheld radios. Rachel Mendez arrived later that morning, hair in a bun, recorder in hand, voice sharp and clear as always. "You need to go on camera," she told Clara. "Not just a quote, a statement. Eyes to lens. Let people see the person Reeves is threatening." Clara hesitated. "I'm not looking to be famous." Rachel shook her head. "You're not. You're becoming a symbol. And symbols don't hide." So Clara stood in front of the cabin, the wind tugging at her coat, snow swirling behind her like a storm refusing to settle. Rachel asked her to speak directly to the camera. Clara didn't write anything down. She just looked straight ahead and said, "This land doesn't belong to those who buy it. It belongs to those who remember it." She didn't smile. She didn't flinch. And the second the video hit the internet, it spread like wildfire. Within 24 hours, national coverage picked up the story. Environmental groups rallied. Protesters gathered outside Reeves Mining's regional headquarters in Helena. 2 more former employees came forward with sworn testimonies backing Samuel's claims. Croft, for the first time in public memory, responded. On a live press conference, he stood in front of a marble podium and called Clara misguided, claiming Samuel was mentally unwell and motivated by personal family discord, not facts. He said the evidence was fabricated. The tapes were edited. The maps were old fiction wrapped in frontier folklore. But the internet didn't buy it. Because while Croft was deflecting, Ferris had already handed over samples from the illegal drainage pipes to a certified lab. The results came in faster than expected. Toxic levels of cadmium, lead, and arsenic. Clara stood with Ferris when the results were released to the press. Reeves didn't just steal the land, Ferris said. They poisoned it. No one could ignore it now. But visibility came with danger. 2 nights after the lab results went public, the cabin was firebombed. It happened just after midnight. Clara Thomas and Eli were staying at Reuben's place down the road. The marshals had insisted they not sleep at the cabin for the next few nights. It saved their lives. By the time the fire trucks arrived, the structure was engulfed. The roof had caved in. The journal's maps and physical artifacts were reduced to ash. Only what Ferris had digitized survived. Clara stood at the ridge watching the cabin collapse into itself. Thomas stood beside her, hollow-eyed. It was just wood, he said. No, Clara whispered. It was home. Eli stepped forward silent for once and placed Samuel's compass recovered from her backpack on the snowy earth where the porch had been. I don't think he'd be mad, Eli said. He'd probably just say, now you really know what they're willing to burn. Clara stared at the fire until it was just smoke and silence. And then she said, if the truth's still standing, then we haven't lost anything at all. The investigation escalated. The Department of Justice opened a formal corruption probe. The Department of the Interior issued a temporary halt to all mining activities on the disputed ridge. Ferris filed a petition to establish the land as a federally protected conservation zone, citing irreversible ecological harm and historic whistleblower documentation. Rachel's next article labeled the entire incident the Mountain Reckoning. Reeves Mining's stock dropped 19% in one day. Croft issued a second press statement, this time from behind closed doors, no questions allowed. He claimed the company had been misled by legacy leadership and promised a full internal audit. But Clara didn't care about their spin. She cared about the next step. What happens if they try to buy their way out? She asked Ferris. They'll try, he said. Offer settlements, NDA payouts. Some politician will call it economic compromise. Clara shook her head. Then we turn the mountain into a monument. Thomas looked up from the corner where he'd been sitting in quiet reflection. You really think it can become that? He asked. Clara didn't hesitate. I don't just think it. I owe it. 2 days later, Agent Waters returned with a flash drive. Recovered something from the cabin's buried camera system, she said. Your motion sensor triggered when the arsonist approached. Grainy, but it's enough to ID a match. She plugged it in. Clara, Eli Thomas, and Ferris crowded around the laptop screen. A dark figure. A familiar walk. Heavy boots. A lighter held to a soaked rag. The face turned for 1 second. Long enough. Thomas froze. Croft's fixer, he whispered. Name's Granger. Worked security detail for decades. He's been doing Croft's dirty work since the 90s. Clara's jaw clenched. Ferris nodded slowly. This is what the DOJ needs. Direct tie between the company and criminal acts. With this, they can press charges. Eli whispered, "So what now?" Clara stood tall, firelight from the video dancing across her face. Now we finish the story, while the ending's still ours to write. The courthouse in Missoula stood like an old sentinel, wide-shouldered gray, and braced against the Montana wind. On the morning of the preliminary hearing, Clara stood just outside its steps, dressed in her one good winter coat, clutching a small notepad, like it might steady her hands. Eli stood beside her, taller now, somehow older in ways she couldn't measure. Inside the room buzzed with tension. Reporters lined the gallery. Government officials filed in with briefcases and stern expressions. Security presence had tripled. Cameras weren't allowed, but that didn't stop the whispers. Reeves Mining had shown up in force. Croft entered last, suited, polished, but less cocky than before. His eyes met Clara's just once, and in that brief second she saw it, panic dressed as confidence. Thomas took the witness stand first. He gave his full name, his history with the company, the roles he played, and the secrets he helped bury. When asked why he had stayed silent for so long, he didn't sugarcoat it. "Because I thought silence would cost me less," he said, voice rough with regret. But it turns out it cost everything. The courtroom hushed. Ferris presented the evidence next to the tapes, the lab results, the surveillance video of Granger, the testimonies from former employees. Each document was a nail. Each tape a hammer. Each silence from the defense team devastating. When Clara took the stand, her palms were dry, her voice firm. "I didn't go looking for any of this," she told the room. "I just wanted a quiet place to start over." But that mountain didn't need quiet. It needed someone to listen. She looked directly at the judge. And when a place starts speaking, when the dead leave behind their truth, you don't turn away. You answer. There were no outbursts, no dramatic objections, just gravity. Afterward. Outside this courthouse, Rachel approached her with a microphone. "Do you believe justice will come?" Clara didn't hesitate. Justice doesn't wait to be delivered. Sometimes you have to drag it up a mountain piece by piece. Back at Rubin's place that evening, the news rolled in fast. The DOJ had issued a formal indictment against Reeves Mining, naming Croft Granger and 2 board members in the first round. Charges included conspiracy, environmental violations, obstruction of justice, and corporate fraud. Federal marshals arrested Granger at a motel outside Butte just before he could flee the state. An anonymous whistleblower inside Reeves Mining handed over internal memos proving the company knew about the contamination and lied about remediation for over 15 years. Clara sat at the table surrounded by maps, court notices, and press clippings. Eli scrolled through his phone, reading headlines aloud. Whistleblower legacy could reshape environmental law. The woman who burned the ridge into history. He paused, looking up at her. "You're all over the news." She gave a tired smile. "Let's hope the mountain gets top billing." 2 days later, Agent Waters returned. She brought documents, official and heavy. Petition to reclassify the disputed land into a federal conservation zone is advancing. Fast. Clara raised an eyebrow. Fast Waters nodded. "Because it's not just about you anymore. It's bigger than one woman and one mining company. Public's behind you. Lawmakers are watching." She laid a document on the table. "This gives you temporary stewardship of the land. Until final classification, you're the point of contact for all environmental decisions." Clara stared at the paper. Eli whispered, "Is that like owning it?" Waters answered. It's like guarding it. Clara swallowed hard. I never asked for that kind of responsibility. You didn't have to, Waters said. You earned it. That night, Clara walked the edge of the ridge, Samuel's compass in her pocket, her boots crunching over fresh snow. The wind carried the scent of pine ash, and something cleaner now, like the land had begun to breathe again. She thought of Samuel, of the tapes, of the fire, of the brick through the window, and of the girl she had once been clutching, a 50-cent deed in one hand and a half-broken heart in the other. She had no home then. She had one now, not 4 walls and a roof, something bigger, something rooted. She sat on a fallen tree, pulled the compass from her pocket, and turned it in her hands. The needle wavered, then steadied north, steady, unmoving, like truth. Eli appeared beside her, flashlight swinging at his side. Ferris just called, he said. EPA wants to partner with a local land trust to start restoration studies. You're at the top of their list. She looked at him. You ready to build something permanent? Eli grinned. I thought we already were. The next day, she met with Ferris, Rachel, and representatives from 3 environmental organizations. They toured what remained of the cabin. The foundation, the charred beams, the journal pages that had survived only in scanned form. Rachel took a moment alone by the ridge, her voice quiet. This place tells a hell of a story. Clara stood beside her, arms crossed against the wind. It's not over. No, Rachel said. But it finally feels like it belongs to someone willing to tell the truth. Clara nodded. Let's make sure that truth doesn't fade. Later that afternoon, a letter arrived, hand-delivered by an EPA official. Clara opened it at the table, unfolding the parchment slowly. At the top, United States Department of the Interior. In bold, below provisional approval, conservation designation of Reeves Ridge. She read the words 3 times. Then she handed it to Thomas. He took it, read it silently, then looked at her with a mixture of awe and apology. You did what I couldn't, he said. No, she replied gently. We did what Samuel always hoped someone would. That evening, Eli built a small fire where the cabin's fireplace used to be. Just a circle of stones and a few logs. They sat around it quietly, Clara, Eli, Thomas, Reuben, Rachel, and Agent Waters. The stars blinked overhead. No helicopters, no headlights. Just peace. Thomas raised a glass of cider. To the mountain. Everyone joined in. Clara waited a beat longer, then added, and to the voices it never let die. The fire crackled. The wind passed gently over the ridge, and for the first time in years, the land held its breath and exhaled. The first spring rain came soft, steady, like the land was letting go of something heavy. It washed the last crusts of soot from the scorched ground, where the cabin once stood, rinsed the bitter edge from the pine trees, and coaxed green buds from the blackened soil. The mountain had not forgotten, but it had forgiven. Clara stood at the edge of the ridge, her boots wet, the wind lifting her hair, and watched as crews laid the first stone for what would become the Samuel Reeves Conservation Learning Center. The name wasn't flashy. It didn't need to be. The truth already had weight. Eli was down by the clearing with 2 local high school students, helping plant a row of young saplings. They were part of the new community restoration program Ferris had helped establish. For every acre scarred by toxic runoff, they would plant 10 new trees, not to erase the damage, but to answer it. Reuben had brought old forestry maps and started training volunteers to monitor soil conditions. Rachel was writing a book, Even Thomas, now officially retired, spent mornings teaching geology classes to kids from nearby towns. He'd found a quiet rhythm, his guilt no longer a chain, just a scar he'd chosen not to hide. Clara visited the site daily, not to supervise, to remember. She traced her fingers over Samuel's compass, still warm from her pocket. The land was changing, but so was she. The fire hadn't broken her, it had burned away everything that didn't matter. The first group of students would arrive next week. 20 teenagers from former mining towns across the state. Kids who'd grown up believing their futures had already been decided by geography, by history, by corporations with deep pockets and shallow morals. She planned to tell them the truth, that geography was not destiny, that silence was not safety, and that one woman with nothing but a deed and a backbone could start a fire that changed everything. Ferris had said the case would drag on for years. Legal appeals, corporate restructuring, more headlines. But Reeves Mining, as the world had known it, was finished. The board had been dissolved. The ridge, secured under federal trust, would never be touched again. It hadn't been about revenge. It had always been about remembrance and rebuilding. That afternoon, Clara walked the new trail being carved along the eastern slope. It followed the line of Samuel's original map, the one buried under the floorboards. She passed old landmarks, the cracked boulder shaped like a heart, the half-fallen pine they'd once used to mark the seasons. At the summit, a single bench faced west. She sat alone and pulled a folded sheet of paper from her coat. Samuel's final note, the one that hadn't been addressed to lawyers, officials, or historians. Just a whisper across time. You can't preserve the land by owning it. You preserve it by loving it in public. Clara read it again, eyes damp, heart full. Then she took a pen and added her own line beneath his, and by refusing to let anyone silence what the earth remembers. She tucked it away. Below the ridge buzzed with soft voices, shovels, laughter. Hope. She stood and made her way down the path, no longer difficult. The trail had been cleared, not perfectly, but enough. At the base, Eli waited with a clipboard, his jeans muddied, his grin wide. New problem, he said. Clara raised an eyebrow. Already? We've got too many applicants for next year's program. Teachers from Oregon, Colorado, even Canada are asking to partner. It's getting big. Good, she said. Let it grow. He hesitated. That scare you? How big it might get? She looked up at the trees, at the ridge, at the sky, now turning from gray to gold. No, she said, because we built it from truth, not fear. They walked back together toward the lodge, still under construction, bare beams, open walls, windows yet to be installed. But even incomplete, it felt like something real, something permanent. Inside, Thomas was speaking with a journalist from NPR, telling a story that once would have shamed him. Now it was how he paid his debt with honesty. On the far wall, the plans for the main exhibit were pinned. At its center, a replica of the hidden box Samuel had left behind. The tapes would play on loop. His words would echo for generations. And nearby, a bronze plaque was already mounted. It read, "In memory of those who listened when silence was easier." That night, Clara sat by a fire, not one of desperation or destruction, but of comfort. Marshals no longer patrolled. Reporters no longer camped outside. The land was quiet. Eli handed her a mug of tea and sat beside her. Think he'd be proud, he asked. She didn't need to ask who he meant. Yes, she said. But more than that, he'd be relieved. That someone listened. That the story wasn't lost. A long silence passed, warm and full. Eli broke it. You know, you never told me why you bid on this place that day. The auction. She smiled into the steam of her tea. Because something about it felt unfinished, she said. Like it was waiting for someone to find what had been buried. Not just treasure, but truth. He nodded slowly. I think it was waiting for you. They didn't speak after that. They just watched the stars, knowing that the mountain alive, wild remembering, was no longer a secret. It was a legacy. And legacies, when guarded by love and courage, don't vanish. They bloom, even from ash.